One day, without warning, you will stop being useful to the world in the way you once were. Not because you failed, not because you were careless, but because time quietly moved on, while certain things stayed with you longer than they should have. Retirement is sold as rest, freedom, a soft landing after decades of effort. But that story leaves something out. Because long before the money runs thin, before the body slows, before the phone stops ringing, there are objects around you right now that are already aging into regret. They sit in garages, in storage units you haven't visited in years, in filing cabinets thick with paper no one will ever read again, in closets filled with versions of yourself that no longer exist. And they don't look dangerous. They look familiar, comforting, even. That's why they sip so hard to let go. Every retiree who ever said, "I wish I had acted sooner," was once exactly where you are now. Standing at the edge of a decision they didn't recognize as urgent. They believed time would always give them one more chance. One more buyer, one more good year, one more moment where selling would feel easier. But markets don't wait. Bodies don't wait. And relevance doesn't wait either. There is a particular kind of regret that only arrives later in life. It isn't that loud. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It says, "This was worth something once. Someone would have paid for this. I could have used this money when I needed it." By the time that voice appears, it's already too late. What was once valuable becomes invisible. What was once an asset becomes a burden. And what was once optional becomes unavoidable. This isn't still about minimalism. It's not about decluttering. It's about understanding that value has an expiration date. And most people don't notice when it passes. In the next few moments, you still begin to see why the most painful retirement regrets aren't about what people spent, but about what they kept for too long. And once you recognize the first thing on that list, you realize something unsettling. You may already be holding on to it. And that realization is where the real trouble begins. Before regret ever shows its face, there is a long, quiet season where everything feels fine. Not perfect, just stable enough to stop asking hard questions. This is the stage where most people make their biggest mistake. They look around and see a lifetime neatly stacked behind them. A house that has paid off, or nearly. A garage filled with useful things, documents, tools, collections, investments, vehicles, equipment, proof of a life well managed. And because nothing is actively falling apart, the mind relaxes. There is no rush. I'll deal with that later. That still has value. Someone will want this someday. Psychologists call this status quo bias. The tendency to believe that what exists now will continue to exist tomorrow. The same instinct that made people hold failing stocks because they used to be solid. The same instinct that kept factories open long after demand vanished. The same instinct that convinces aging athletes they still have one more good season left. History is full of these moments. Empires at their peak never feel fragile. They feel permanent. Rome didn't collapse in panic. It collapsed in comfort. People believed the systems around them were too big, too proven, too essential to fail. So they postponed action. They delayed change. They held on. Retirement carries the same illusion. You tell yourself, "I've earned the right to keep what's mine. I might need this later." Selling now would be foolish. Prices will go back up. But the calendar doesn't care about sentiment. Markets quietly shift. Demand erodes. Technology moves forward without asking permission. And value begins leaking out, slowly enough that you don't notice. This is where the danger lives. Not in crisis, but in calm. Because when nothing feels urgent, everything gets postponed. That old car in the driveway still runs. That equipment in the shed still works. That collection still feels special. Those papers still feel important. So you keep them. What no one tells you is this. The years before retirement are often the last window where selling is easy. You still have energy. You still have leverage. You still have time to wait for the right buyer, instead of accepting the only one. Once that window starts to close, it closes quietly. No alarm, no announcement, just fewer calls, less interest, lower offers. And most people don't recognize the warning signs when they first appear. They mistake them for bad timing, for temporary conditions, for noise instead of signal. But by the time the illusion of safety cracks, the real cost of waiting begins to surface. And the first crack always shows up somewhere familiar, in a place you've stopped looking closely at. That's where this story turns. The first cracks never announce themselves. They don't arrive as disasters. They arrive as small inconveniences. A buyer who doesn't call back. An item that sits listed longer than expected. An appraisal that comes in lower than it should. You notice but you don't react, because everything still works. The car still starts. The equipment still runs. The collection still looks impressive to you. And that sips the problem. Value doesn't disappear all at once. It erodes, quietly, politely, without asking for your attention. The world changes its mind about things long before it tells you. At this stage, people become excellent rationalizers. It's just a slow market. People don't appreciate quality anymore. I don't need to sell right now anyway. I'll get a better price next year. Every explanation feels reasonable, responsible even. But here's what's really happening. Demand is shrinking, not temporarily but structurally. The buyers are aging out. The younger generation doesn't want what you own. Or worse, they don't even recognize its value. Think of typewriters, film cameras, encyclopedias, office furniture built for a world that no longer exists. Once respected assets that became invisible almost overnight. No one woke up one morning and decided they were worthless. They just stopped needing them. This is where denial becomes subtle. Not loud refusal, but soft postponement. You tell yourself you'll deal with it. After things settle. After retirement paperwork is done. After one more year of work. After life slows down. But life doesn't slow down the way you expect. The cracks widen in ways that feel unrelated. Storage fees increase. Maintenance costs creep in. Insurance becomes harder to justify. What once felt like ownership begins to feel like responsibility. Then wait. And still, most people hold on. Because selling now would mean admitting something uncomfortable. That the peak already passed. Without your permission. That realization stings. So it gets pushed aside. Ignored. But the cracks don't stop spreading just because you stop looking at them. They deepen. And soon, they become impossible to explain away. That's when the illusion breaks completely. And denial turns into something heavier. That moment is closer than it feels. There comes a point when the cracks stop being subtle. They begin to show. What once took weeks to sell now takes months. What once attracted buyers now attracts questions. What once justified its space now competes with necessities. And still, people hesitate. This is the stage where denial becomes active. Not ignorance. Defense. You start explaining instead of listening. Justifying instead of adapting. You tell yourself the market is wrong. That people have lost their standards. That patience will fix what time has already taken. Societies do this too. When systems begin to fail, leaders don't call it collapse. They call it temporary disruption, market correction, short-term adjustment. Because admitting the truth would require action. And action would require loss. At a personal level, it feels the same. Selling now would mean accepting less. Letting go of identity. Admitting that a chapter has closed. So you wait. But waiting has a cost. Maintenance becomes repair. Repair becomes replacement. Replacement becomes impossible. The thing you once owned begins to own you. And this is where the human stories appear. The man who kept his business equipment too long. believing it would fund his retirement, until regulations changed and buyers vanished. The woman who held onto a valuable collection, certain it would be her safety net, until her health forced a rushed sale at a fraction of its worth. The couple who delayed downsizing, convinced the house would always sell easily, until the market turned and time ran out. None of them were foolish. They were confident. And confidence, at the wrong moment, becomes a trap. This is where reality starts pressing in. Retirement income feels tighter than expected. Expenses rise instead of fall. Options quietly disappear. And suddenly, selling is no longer strategic. It circs reactive. Offers arrive, but they sit smaller. Negotiations feel rushed. You accept terms you would have laughed at years earlier. And the most painful part, you know this could have gone differently. Because deep down, you remember the moment when acting sooner would have changed everything. The moment you dismissed. The moment you delayed. The moment you told yourself, not yet. That moment is what comes next. And once it passes, it never comes back. There is always a moment when everything could still have been saved. It doesn't feel dramatic. It doesn't feel urgent. That sips why it sips mist. This moment usually arrives quietly, disguised as inconvenience. A doctor's appointment that lasts longer than expected. A sudden expense you didn't plan for. A call reminding you that time isn't as flexible as it used to be. And for the first time, selling isn't optional anymore. This is the crossroads. On one side, acting decisively, even if it hurts. On the other, holding on just a little longer, hoping for relief. Most people choose hope. Hope that the market will bounce back. Hope that energy will return. Hope that someone, anyone, will recognize the value you see. But hope is not a strategy, and time is no longer neutral. This is when the fatal choice is made. You delay one last time. You tell yourself, I'll do it next month. After the holidays, when things settle down. But things don't settle down. They accelerate. Health becomes unpredictable. Mobility shrinks. Decision-making feels heavier. The same task that once felt manageable now feels overwhelming. Paperwork piles up. Calls go unanswered. Deadlines quietly expire. And then, without ceremony, the window closes. The buyer you were counting on moves on. The platform you relied on shuts down. The rules change. The demand evaporates. You didn't notice the exact moment it happened. No sound. No signal. Just a sudden realization that the leverage is gone. Now, selling means accepting whatever is offered, if anything is offered at all. What once could have funded freedom now barely covers expenses. What once represented security now represents loss. And the regret is sharp, because it's specific. You don't regret having the thing. You regret not letting it go when it still mattered. This is the point of no return. Not because the item is gone, but because the choice is gone. And from here on, consequences unfold on their own terms. That sets when everything begins to fall quiet. And that quiet is where the collapse truly starts. Collapse doesn't look like chaos. It looks like silence. No more calls. No more negotiations. No more, maybe next week. Just stillness. The kind that settles in slowly and stays. By now the things you once meant to sell are no longer assets. They're just reminders. Each one carries a quiet weight. Not of money lost, but of decisions postponed. You move around them carefully. You avoid certain rooms. You stop opening certain drawers. This is where confusion sets in. You don't understand how it happened so fast. How something valuable became untouchable. How time slipped away without ever asking. And there's just no one to argue with. The market has already moved on. The buyers are gone. The rules have changed. What remains is maintenance. Not improvement. Preservation. Keeping things running just well enough to avoid disaster. Just clean enough to delay the inevitable. Just intact enough to pretend there's still a choice. but the cost keeps rising. Emotionally, financially, physically, every repair feels pointless. Every payment feels heavier. Every reminder feels personal. This is when people stop talking about it. They change the subject. They joke it away. They say, "It is what it is." But inside, something has collapsed. Not the house, not the account, the sense of control. Because now, instead of planning the future, you're managing the consequences of the past. Instead of deciding, you're reacting. And the most painful realization arrives quietly. No one is coming to fix this for you. There's no villain, no single mistake, just time, doing what time always does. Moving forward, this is the stage where people feel strangely empty. Not angry, not panicked, just tired. Tired of carrying things that no longer carry them. And in that emptiness, a final understanding begins to form. One that comes too late for action, but not too late for truth. That truth is what remains after everything else falls away. And facing it is the hardest part of all. When the dust settles, what remains is not a house or a car or a collection. It's a quiet, heavy space inside yourself. A place filled with the echoes of choices you didn't make. The small, whispered warnings you ignored. The moments when hesitation felt safe, but wasn't. You begin to see clearly, finally, what all those objects represented: security, freedom, possibility, and how fragile it all was. The reality is subtle, almost cruel. It's not that everything is gone. It's that everything is no longer yours to command. The value is still there, somewhere, but out of reach. You might still have money. You might still have possessions. You might still have health, but you can never reclaim the timing you wasted, the leverage you surrendered, the calm window that quietly closed while you hesitated. It is a strange kind of grief, not for people, not even for material things, but for opportunity. The moments you could have turned into security, into freedom, into peace, slipped away one delayed decision at a time, and all that remains is reflection. Long pauses become heavy. Every room, every shelf, every untouched object carries a subtle question. Why didn't I act when I could? And as you sit with that weight, you realize something even more unsettling. Time doesn't just erase value. It erases chances. And the ones it erases first are the ones you thought you'd always have. What happens next is a warning for anyone still standing at that edge. Now listen closely. This isn't just a story about things you own. It's a story about time, and about how it slips through your fingers while you believe you still have control. Every item you postpone selling, every decision you delay, every opportunity you ignore, is quietly ticking toward expiration. The world will not wait. The market will not pause. Your energy, your health, your influence, none of it will stand still for your convenience. You may think there will always be another chance, another buyer, another offer, another moment when the price feels right, but that chance, it doesn't always come. And when it's gone, the regret is sharp, precise, and unforgiving. So look around you now. Every room, every drawer, every storage unit, every object you cling to, because someday it will matter. Ask yourself, if today were the last day to act, what would you keep? What would you sell? And how many of these choices will become silent chains if you wait even a little longer? This is not fear. It is clarity. And it is urgent. Because the truth is simple. The things you fail to sell before retirement will not wait for you. They will outlast your patience. They will outlast your energy. They will outlast your ability to change what comes next. And when that day arrives, when you finally realize the window is gone, you will know, without a doubt, that some regrets can never be undone. Some things must be let go before it's too late.